They threw her out with the trash. Not metaphorically, literally. The Vrethik did not believe in metaphor, their language had no room for it. So when Overseer Kelulan decided that the warm-blooded specimen in Cargo Bay 9 was no longer producing useful work, he keyed the disposal sequence himself, and the same chute that had spat out a week's worth of ration husks, broken tool casings, and the cracked carapace shell of a junior officer who had failed his audit, opened one last time and vomited Dr. Nora Vance into the black. She had 3 minutes of suit air. She had a fractured wrist from the soldier who had dragged her down the corridor. She had the taste of her own blood in her mouth from where she had bitten through her cheek to keep from screaming when they unsealed the chute. And she had, tucked inside the wrist seal of her stolen pressure suit, a single data chit no bigger than a fingernail, which the Vrethik had not bothered to search for because the Vrethik did not believe a creature like her could plan. That was their first mistake. The flagship dwindled behind her, a long matte black wedge sliding through the dust of a dead nebula, its running lights cold as fish scales. Nora let herself spin. She let herself look. She wanted to remember the exact shape of the thing she was going to break. Then she activated the suit beacon, the one set to a frequency the Vrethik did not bother to monitor because no civilized species used it, and she waited for the wreck. She had been on the Vrethik flagship Karen for 241 Earth days. They had taken her off a science cutter called the Lazarus, which had been making slow circles in the Kuiper dark, mapping ice composition for a project that no one back home would remember within a year. The Vrethik scoops had come out of the corona of a passing comet, the way they always did, riding the tail to hide their heat signature, and the Lazarus had been gutted in under a minute. 6 of the crew were vented, 2 were eaten. Nora and the chief engineer, a soft-spoken Greek man named Petros who hummed when he worked, had been kept. Petros lasted 19 days. The Vrethik did not understand human anatomy well enough to interrogate without killing, and they did not particularly care to learn. He died on a steel table while a junior xenoanatomist tried to find his second stomach. Nora had been more useful. She was a biologist, and the Vrethik had a biology problem. It took her a long time to understand the shape of that problem, because the overseer did not explain anything. He simply set tasks in front of her and watched. A pressurized tank of glassy, eel-like creatures that kept dying in their own waste. A vat of tissue cultures that refused to graft. A reef of coral things, dredged from some world she had never heard of, that flowered briefly and then slewed off their own shells. She was given a workbench, a translator collar that crackled when it tried to render her own words back at her, and a single armed guard who stood in the doorway and watched her with 3 flat amber eyes. She learned, she kept the eels alive, she made the cultures take. She did not save the coral because the coral was already dead when they gave it to her, and she told the overseer so. He did not punish her for the failure. He filed it away. She also learned to listen. The Vrethik had no concept of privacy. They believed that any sound a superior made in the presence of an inferior was a gift, and to acknowledge having heard it was to soil it. So they talked freely in front of her, about the war they were losing on the frontier, about the prey species that had begun to fight back, about the great hunt fleet that was being assembled on the rim, and the apex weapons that the hunt fleet would need, and the laboratory that had been promised 3 cycles ago and had not yet produced a single viable predator. Nora kept her face down and her hands moving, and she listened. She learned the name of the lab, Station Vekasur, a derelict bioweapons facility from the previous hegemonic age, abandoned when the project lead had grown a tumor in his own thorax from the work, and the surviving staff had voted, in the Vrethik manner, to scuttle the program and seal the wreck. She learned its approximate coordinates. She learned that it was being towed slowly inward, toward a refit yard near the Karen's current course, and that the overseer had been told that the towing crew would arrive in roughly 60 cycles, and that if Vekasur did not yield up its old work, the overseer's career and his thorax would be forfeit. She learned, most importantly, that the Vrethic did not believe she could read their language. They believed her mouth was the wrong shape for it. They had not considered that her eyes were not. She had been reading their script for 83 days by the time the overseer dropped a damaged data slate on her workbench and told her, without looking at her, to clean its housing. He had assumed that the cracked screen would be the only thing she could interact with. He had not noticed that the slate's surface, when angled correctly under the bench lamp, reflected the side of his own command tablet from across the room. She had read his tablet for 3 hours that first day. She had read it for an hour every cycle after that. He carried the same tablet every shift. He set it down in the same place. He never noticed the angle of the bench lamp had been adjusted by half a degree. This was the rhythm of her life on the Kaarin. Small advantages, patient theft, the slow, careful construction of a future that the Vrethic did not believe she was capable of imagining. She kept herself alive by inches. She rationed her sleep. She rationed her water. She rationed, most of all, her face, never letting it show anything except the dull, tired, faintly cooperative blankness that the overseer had decided was the natural expression of a properly broken specimen. She practiced it in the polished surface of the eel tank when no one was watching. She practiced until she could hold it through anything. She held it through the day they brought Petro's body past her workbench on a hover pallet. She held it through the day a junior researcher, in a fit of curiosity, took a tissue sample from her shoulder with a coring bit, without anesthetic, because he wanted to see what color she bled. She held it through the day the overseer asked her, with the casual interest of a man asking after the weather, whether she had any children at home. She had said no. She had said it without inflection. She did not, but her sister did, 2 of them, both under 5, and she had not given the overseer their existence, not for any amount of pain. That, too, was a small advantage. The Vrethic kept files on the families of their captives when they could find the information, because family was leverage and the Vrethic understood leverage even when they did not understand love. Her file said, "No children, no spouse, no living parents." The last item was a lie she had told on her first day. Her father was on Earth, in the small lighthouse keeper's cottage where she had grown up, and if the overseer had known he existed, the overseer would have used him. She had kept her father alive by saying he was dead. She thought about this sometimes in the dark, and it made her laugh in a way that frightened her a little. It made her think about how much of being human in the end was the willingness to tell a single, careful, unflinching lie to the right enemy at the right moment. It made her think also about what she would tell her father if she ever saw him again, about the lies she had told to keep him. She did not let herself think about it for long. Thinking about it for long would have softened her face, and the overseer would have noticed. 241 days. On the last morning she fed the eels. She let the overseer watch her do it. She straightened her collar. She made a small joke in English to the guard, the way she had made small jokes every morning for months, and the guard ignored her the way he always did, because the translator did not bother to render the joke, and the overseer had stopped paying attention to the noise she made. Then she palmed a slim ceramic blade out of the eel tank's filter housing, where she had been hiding it for 31 days, and she slid it under the guard's mandibular plate at the angle she had learned by watching their own junior xenoanatomists work on Petros. He did not make a sound. He folded. She took his sidearm, his key card, and the chitin plate from his wrist that the Kaarin's automated systems read as authorization. She walked, not ran, to the disposal chute on Deck 9, because running would have triggered the corridor sensors and walking would not. She had timed this. She had timed everything. She keyed the chute. She climbed inside. She pulled the lever. And she let the ship throw her away like garbage, because being garbage was the only thing on the Kaarin that the Vrethic did not bother to track. That was her plan, the whole of it, to make them believe, for 90 minutes, that they had successfully discarded her. 90 minutes was the gap between the Karen's current position and the slow, drifting hulk of Station Veketsur. 90 minutes was the window in which her suit beacon, pinging on a fisherman's frequency from her grandfather's Aegean childhood, would be heard by exactly one thing in the dark: the salvage hooks of an automated Vrethic tug, programmed centuries ago to retrieve any object broadcasting that particular distress wave because the long-dead Vrethic who had set the program had been trying to lure in a different kind of prey. The tug came. It was old and ugly and missing a third of its plating, and its claws closed around her with the disinterest of something that had not had a thought in 1,000 years, and it began the long, dumb haul back to the only place it knew how to go. It took her to Veketsur. She wept inside her helmet for the first 15 minutes of the tow. She did not let herself weep for longer than that. She had work to do. The station was a barnacle. That was the first thing she thought when the tug's lights crawled over its hull, that someone had built a barnacle the size of a cathedral and bolted it to a slow-tumbling asteroid and then forgotten about it. Its surface was crusted with growth she did not recognize, and its airlock was half open, jammed by a frozen tendril of something organic that had tried to crawl out a long time ago and failed. The tug docked itself with the patience of a machine that had nowhere else to be. The claws released her. She floated free into the open airlock, and the lights, recognizing the chitin authorization on her wrist, came on. The lights came on. She remembered later that this was the moment she allowed herself to believe she might live. Not the moment she had stabbed the guard. Not the moment she had pulled the chute lever. The moment the dead station's lights flickered into a pale green wash, and the inner door cycled, and the air, stale and metallic and 300 years old, sighed out around her, and she understood that the Vrethic who had sealed this place had been so confident no one would ever find it that they had not even bothered to vent it. She had a working laboratory, she had a sealed atmosphere, she had power. She had, when she pulled the data chit from her wrist seal and slid it into the first console she could find, the entire research record of the Veketsur Predator program, downloaded over 6 months of careful theft from the Karen's archives. The file fragments hidden inside the routine biology reports she had been required to file every cycle. The file fragments she had stitched back together by hand on the only computer the Vrethic ever let her near. She had everything the Vrethic had ever known about how to build a weapon out of a living thing. And she had, in a sealed cryo-vault in the back of Cargo Bay 2, a colony of biological samples that the original Veketsur staff had collected from 100 worlds: bone, tissue, gene strand, marrow, left to sleep forever in liquid nitrogen because the project lead had died before he could decide what to do with them. There were 6 samples from Earth, smuggled, she guessed, by some old human freighter that had been raided in the Dark Age before first contact and never reported missing. The Vrethic had labeled them in their own script. She had to translate the labels. When she did, she laughed. She laughed so hard that she had to brace herself against the cryovault to keep from drifting, and the laugh came out of her like a sob, and her breath fogged the inside of her helmet and froze there in tiny silver crystals. 5 of the samples were ordinary: tuna, cod, a species of grouper, 2 kinds of seal. The 6th sample was Carcharodon carcharias, great white. The Vrethic had stolen, 3 centuries ago, the genetic record of the apex predator of Earth's oceans, and they had filed it away in the dark, and they had forgotten about it, and now it was hers. She floated in the green-lit cargo bay with her broken wrist throbbing, and her face wet and her teeth bared in something that was not quite a smile. And she said, out loud, in the empty dead language of a dead alien research station 300 years from home, "Hello, old friend." She gave herself 60 cycles. That was the window. After 60 cycles, the Vrethic towing crew would arrive at the coordinates where they expected to find a quietly drifting wreck, and they would instead find whatever Nora Vance had made of it, and she would either be ready by then or she would be dead. She worked. The first 3 cycles were inventory. She mapped the station. She found the gene forges, 6 of them, 3 still functional after a quick repair of their cooling lines. She found the growth tanks, 12 of them, 11 of them serviceable. She found the predator pens, long, low, armored holding cells lined with diamond mesh, and she found in the central command pit the chair where the original project lead had died, his skeleton still slumped over the console, his bone mandibles open in what she chose to read as surprise. She apologized to him quietly. She moved his remains to a side chamber. She closed the door. She slept 4 hours out of every 20. She ate the protein paste the station's old stores had been keeping since before her great-grandmother was born. It tasted of nothing. She did not care. She thought of Petros sometimes. She thought of the way he had hummed when he worked, an old song his grandmother had taught him, and she found herself humming the same tune as she calibrated the first gene forge. It made her laugh again. It made her cry. It made her work faster. By the 7th cycle, she had a viable embryonic culture. By the 12th, she had something the size of her fist swimming in a tank, blunt-snouted and wrong-eyed, dying of a metabolic flaw she had introduced and could not yet fix. She killed it herself. She kept its tissue. She started again. By the 20th cycle, she had her first one alive. It was 4 feet long and pearl gray, and it watched her through the diamond mesh with the patient, unhurried attention of a creature that had not yet decided whether she was food. She named it Petros because she had to name it something, and because the name made her smile and she could not afford to forget how to smile. It died on the 22nd cycle, when she tested the vacuum tolerance modifications she had spliced in from the Vrethic's old work, and discovered that the modifications worked perfectly but the heart did not. She killed it herself again. She kept its tissue. She started again. She started again and again and again. She gave them all the same name. There were eventually a great many Petroses, and the original Petros, she thought, would have understood. The work itself was strange. She had been a marine biologist. She had not been, in any honest sense, a bioengineer. The most advanced thing she had ever built on her own, before the Vrethic took her, was a coral nursery off the coast of Crete, and the most ambitious gene work she had ever signed off on was a heat-resistant splice for a species of grouper that was dying in the warming Mediterranean. The Vrethic gene forges were 100 years past anything Earth had ever built. The interface alone took her 4 cycles to understand. The biology took longer. But the data chit was extraordinary. She had stolen, in 6 months of slow, careful theft, the complete predator engineering record of a project that had run for 40 years and consumed the working lives of 112 Vrethic xenobiologists. Their failures were documented in obsessive detail. Their dead-end branches, their abandoned splices, their notes on what worked and what did not, all of it was in the chit, and all of it had been organized for her, unwittingly, by the long-dead project lead, who had been the kind of man who could not bear to file his own work imperfectly. She read his notes. She read the notes of every dead Vrethic who had ever worked on the project. She read the post-mortem reports on their failures. She read, in particular, the long, bitter monograph the project lead had written in his final cycle, when the tumor was already in his thorax, and he had known the project was about to be scuttled, in which he had set down, with the cold honesty of a man with nothing left to lose, every reason the Vrethic had failed to build a viable apex predator from the genetic material they had stolen across the galaxy. The reasons were all, when she read them carefully, the same reason. The Vrethic had never used Earth. They had used 100 worlds. They had used the chiton spiders of Vor and the singing eels of the Inner Rim and the burrow cats of Selith Prime. They had used the apex predator of every world they had ever surveyed, and they had failed with all of them, because all of those predators had evolved in environments where the prey eventually fought back, and the gene strands the Vrethic had needed to weave together had been corrupted over millions of years by the slow, careful evolution of cooperation, of communication, of restraint. The Vrethic had not surveyed Earth. They had only raided one freighter 3 centuries ago, and they had taken samples from the freighter's cold storage without knowing what the samples were, and the samples had sat in the vault at Vekatsur for 300 years, because no one in the Vrethic Biology Corps had ever bothered to translate the labels. Earth's apex predator had evolved in an ocean where its prey could not, in any meaningful sense, fight back. It had evolved for 400 million years without competition, without negotiation, without the slow, gentling pressure that had ruined every other genetic line the Vrethic had ever tried. It was, by the cold standards of the Project Lead's monograph, the ideal substrate. It just happened to be on a world the Vrethic had never bothered to visit. Nora read the monograph 3 times. She thought about her grandfather who had been a fisherman and who had told her once, when she was 9 and afraid of swimming, that the thing about a shark was that a shark did not hate you and did not love you and would never, in its whole life, do anything other than exactly what it was. She thought, yes, that is the substrate. She got to work. The first stable line took her until cycle 20. The second took her until cycle 25. By cycle 30, she had 3 of them alive at once, and by cycle 35 she had 6, and by cycle 42 she had 9, and by cycle 48 she had 13, and the gene forges were running day and night, and the cooling lines were screaming at her, and she was sleeping 2 hours out of every 20, and she was eating once a cycle, and her broken wrist had healed crooked because she had set it herself with a piece of conduit, and she had not had the time to do it properly. She did not care. She was not building anymore the thing the Vrethic had wanted her to build. She was building the thing she had wanted to build, the thing she had been planning since the morning Petros died on a steel table while a Vrethic researcher tried to find his second stomach. And the work was the thing that kept her alive, and the work was the thing that was going to bring her home, and the work was, in some quiet way she did not have time to examine, the thing that had become her. She watched them through the diamond mesh. They were no longer 4 feet long. They were no longer pearl gray. The Vrethic gene strands she had braided into their spinal columns had given them a kind of armored ridge along the back, slate-colored and faintly iridescent, and the work she had done on their lungs, the work for which Petros the engineer had died on a Vrethic table without ever knowing why, had given them the ability to hold an internal pressure of nearly 2 atmospheres against an external vacuum, for as long as 40 minutes at a stretch. They did not need water to kill. That was the line that came to her, unbidden, the first time she watched one of them strike. They did not need water to kill. They did not need it to swim, either. The Vrethic gene work she had layered along their flanks let them throw themselves through hard vacuum on the kick of their own tail muscle, in a long, lazy curve that would have made any Earth marine biologist weep. They did not need water. They needed prey. She trained them. This was the part she had not allowed herself to think about during the days on the Kaarin, because thinking about it would have softened her face and the overseer would have noticed. Training a Carcharodon was supposed to be impossible. The Vrethic gene work had not changed that. Her sharks were as wild as their Earth ancestors, as patient, as cold. But the Vrethic gene work had given them something the original article had never had, a long, slow pulse of pack cognition, lifted from a wolf analog species on a world Nora did not know the name of, threaded down through the centerline of their brain. They could coordinate, they could remember, they could learn a face. They learned hers first. She made sure of that. She walked the catwalks above the holding tanks every cycle in her stolen Vrethic pressure suit with the helmet visor up, and she let them see her face from below, again and again, until the smaller of them, there were 5 of them now, all named Petros, would rise to the tank's surface and brush its snout against the diamond mesh whenever she passed. She fed them Vrethic. The station's cryovault had a small supply of carcasses, left over from some old experiment, and she thawed them and lowered them into the tanks and let her pet roses learn the taste. She did not enjoy this. She told herself very clearly that she did not enjoy it. Then she went on doing it. On the 40th cycle, she ran her first hunt drill in the open dock. She opened the inner doors. She let the sharks out into the long, dark, vacuum-flooded bay where the original Veketser staff had once tested their failed predators. She seeded the bay with 3 Vrethik soldier drones she had cannibalized from the station's defense locker, programmed to evade and counterattack. She watched from the command pit. The drones lasted 11 seconds. She watched the recording afterward, slowly, frame by frame. She watched the way the sharks moved through the vacuum, the long curve of the approach, the dead-eyed roll just before the bite, the way the pack coordinated without sound, one moving high to draw a drone's targeting array, 2 more sweeping low from the blind angle. She watched her own work in the dark, and she put her hand over her mouth and she said, "My God." She did not pray, she did not believe in prayer, but she said the words. On the 50th cycle, she found the broadcast antenna. It was buried in the spine of the station, a long crystalline rod that the original Vrethik staff had used to transmit their research to the hegemonic core. It was still functional. It still had its old encryption keys. It still had, in its address book, the comm codes of every senior hegemonic officer who had been alive 3 centuries ago. Most of those officers were long dead, but the hegemony was a slow, sclerotic, ritual-bound thing, and offices outlived their holders, and the comm codes had been inherited down the centuries, the way a great-grandfather's watch is inherited, and one of the codes in the old address book was the personal channel of the office of the overseer of the outer hunt. The current holder of that office was Overseer Kelulen. She found this out on the 51st cycle, when she ran the address book against the Karen's most recent personnel manifest, which she had stolen the codes for on her last morning aboard. She sat in the command pit for a long time after she found this out. She watched her 3 best Petroses through the bay's observation port, where they drifted in slow, patient circles in the vacuum, watching her back. Then she opened a channel to Overseer Kelulen's personal codec, and she waited for him to answer. He answered on the 3rd ring. His face filled the screen, flat amber eyes, segmented mandible plates, the faint pebbled flush along his thorax that Nora had learned over 241 days meant Vrethik was in a state of mild and self-satisfied authority. He did not recognize her at first. The pressure suit she was wearing was Vrethik. The lab she was sitting in was Vrethik. The lighting was Vrethik. He saw a small, warm-blooded shape against a familiar backdrop, and his first thought, she could see it cross his eyes, was that one of his junior researchers had captured a fresh specimen and was reporting in. Then he saw her face, he saw her smile. The pebbled flush along his thorax went out. "You," he said, the translator collar at her throat rendered it perfectly. "You are dead." "I was," Nora said. "I got better." He was silent. She had never seen a Vrethik silent before. They were a species that filled every gap in conversation with small ritual clickings of their mandible plates, and the absence of those clicks made his face look, for the first time since she had met him, like the face of something that could feel surprise. "Where are you?" he said. "I'm in your old laboratory," she said. "The one you needed, the one you were supposed to deliver to the Hunt fleet." His mandibles clicked once sharply. "You will surrender it," he said. "You will surrender it intact, and the disposal will be conducted properly this time." "No," Nora said, "I don't think so." She angled the camera. She let him see the observation port behind her. She let him see what was on the other side of it. He went silent again. He went silent for a long time. "What have you done?" he said. It was not a question. "I finished your project," she said. "Those are mine," she said. "They are mine. I made them. You gave me everything I needed, and you let me into the only laboratory in the hegemony that could grow them, and then you threw me away, and now they are mine." His mandibles worked. The pebbled flush along his thorax had been replaced, she noticed, by a fine gray pallor along the same plates. She had read about that pallor in the Vrethic medical literature. It was the color their carapace turned when their blood pressure dropped suddenly and dangerously. She let the silence run. She had learned silence from him. "You will not use them," he said at last. "You cannot, they are wild. The original project lead could not control them. You cannot." "They know my face," Nora said. She let him hear that. She let it sit between them, the way her grandmother had taught her to let a hard sentence sit at the dinner table after it had been said. Then she said, "I am going to bring them home, Overseer. I am going to bring them to the Kharin first, because I owe the Kharin a debt. And then I am going to bring them to the Hunt Fleet, because you are going to bring the Hunt Fleet to my world. And then I am going to bring them to the hegemonic core, and I am going to leave them there, because someone in your government needs to learn what it costs to throw a human being away like garbage." His mandibles stopped clicking. "You are one creature," he said. His voice had gone very quiet. "You have made, what, 6 of them? 8. You cannot." 21, Nora said. She had been counting on him to make her say it. She had been counting on him to underestimate her one last time. She watched his face. She watched the moment the number landed. Then she cut the channel. She had 9 cycles left before the towing crew arrived. She did not need 9. She gathered her pet roses. She fed them. She walked the catwalks one last time with her helmet up, and the largest of them, 14 feet long now, with a slow gray ridge along its back that caught the green station lights like the edge of a sword, rose to brush its snout against the diamond mesh as she passed. She put her hand against the mesh. She felt the cold of the creature's skin through her glove. She said very softly, "Hey, Petros." It watched her with its black wet eye. It did not blink. Sharks did not blink, sharks watched. She felt the same way. She loaded them into the station's external pens. She unmoored Vex Sur from its slow asteroid. She fired the old maneuvering thrusters that the long-dead Vrethic staff had installed for emergency repositioning, and the station, barnacle that it was, cathedral that it was, dead and resurrected by a small, angry woman with a fractured wrist, began, very slowly, to move. It moved toward the Kharin. The Kharin saw her coming for 2 hours before she arrived. She knew this because she could see the flagship's targeting arrays come live, one after another, as the station's heat signature crossed their thresholds. She could see the small, bright sparks of scout drones launching from the Kharin's belly to investigate. She did not bother to hide. She did not bother to evade. She wanted to be seen. The first scout drone came in close. She let it look. It was a small spherical thing, no larger than a melon, with 3 lensed eyes arranged in a triangle, and it hovered 50 meters off her observation port and turned its lenses slowly across the station's hull as if it could not quite believe what it was seeing. She waved at it. She made sure her face was visible in the green light of the command pit. She wanted whoever was on the other end of that camera feed, whatever junior officer was sitting in the Kharin's bridge with sweat beading along his mandible plates, to see her face, to see that she was alive, to see that she was smiling. The scout drone hung there for a full minute. Then it turned very slowly and went home. She gave the Kharin another 40 minutes. She wanted them to have time. She wanted the overseer to be on his own bridge by the time she arrived, in his own command chair with his own crew around him, watching her come. She brought the station in slow and broadside, the way an old sailing ship would come in alongside an enemy ship of the line, and when she was close enough that the Kharin's hull filled the observation port, close enough that she could see the individual chitin plates of its armor, close enough that she could see the tiny flicker of an officer's silhouette in one of the bridge slits. She opened the outer doors of the Predator pens. She opened all of them at once. The Petroses went out into the dark. She watched them go. She watched the long, lazy curve of their bodies against the matte black wedge of the Kaarin. She watched them coordinate, the way she had taught them, without sound, one moving high to draw the targeting arrays, 3 more sweeping low from the blind angle, the largest one moving in dead silence along the keel toward the engine vents. She watched the Kaarin's point defense come live. She watched it fire. She watched a single shark, one of the smaller ones named Petros like all the others, take a plasma round to the flank and tumble away, dying into the dark. She watched the rest of them keep coming. She had not expected to mourn. She found in that moment that she did. The small one had been born in Tank 7, 18 cycles ago, on a day she remembered because she had cut her hand on a coupling, and she had laughed when she saw the blood, because it was the first time in 2 months she had bled for any reason other than the Vrethic. The small one had been the first to learn her face. The small one had brushed its snout against the mesh more times than any of the others. The small one was now drifting through the dark with its flank opened by a Vrethic plasma round, and it would freeze before it finished dying, and there was nothing she could do about it. She put her hand against the cold metal of the command pit console. She said very quietly, "I'm sorry, Petros." She did not stop. She did not slow. She kept her eyes on the others. The Kaarin's hull was armored against most things. The Vrethic built well. But the Vrethic had built against threats they understood: kinetic rounds, plasma, the gravitic shears of rival warships, and a 14-foot Carcharodon Carcharias coming in along the keel with the patient, unhurried attention of a creature deciding whether the ship was food was not, in any honest sense, a threat the Vrethic had ever planned for. The point defense lasers had been calibrated to track fast, hot, metallic objects. The Petroses were slow. They were cold. The Vrethic gene work she had added had given them a thermal signature only marginally above the ambient temperature of deep space. And they were biological, which the Kaarin's targeting computers did not, at first, classify as threats at all. The lasers tried to find them. The lasers failed. By the time the Kaarin's bridge officers had overridden the automatic systems and switched to manual targeting, 2 of her sharks were already past the point defense envelope and moving along the hull plates with the easy curving glide of fish moving through a reef. The lasers could not be depressed far enough to reach them. The kinetic batteries would have shattered the ship's own armor. The Vrethic bridge officers, she imagined, were arguing. She had counted on the arguing. The Vrethic argued well. They argued for a long time. The largest Petros found the engine vent. It went in head first, tail flicking, and it kept going until it found the cooling baffle, and it bit through it because biting through things was what its ancestors had done for 400 million years, and the Vrethic gene work she had laid in on top of that had only made the biting better. The Kaarin's engines began to fail. It was not a dramatic failure. The Vrethic did not build ships that failed dramatically. The engines simply began to lose containment, slowly, the way an old man loses his breath at the top of a long flight of stairs, and the running lights along the spine of the flagship dimmed in a long, unhurried wave from stern to bow, and the great matte black wedge began, almost imperceptibly, to drift. The other sharks moved on the hull. 3 of them found the dorsal sensor array and stripped it. 2 more found the long, thin spine of the communications mast and broke it, calmly and methodically, the way a child breaks a stick. The largest came back out of the engine vent with something in its teeth, a section of cooling baffle, twisted and torn, and it dropped the section into the dark and went looking for something else to bite. She watched. She did not smile. She had thought when she planned this that she would smile. She had been wrong. She watched the great matte black wedge of the flagship list slowly to one side, and the running lights flicker and dim, and the bridge slit flare briefly with the orange of an internal fire, and she felt nothing in particular except a deep, slow tiredness, the way a person feels at the end of a long, necessary day of work. She opened a channel to the Kaarin. She did not bother with Overseer Kelulen's personal codec. She broadcast on every frequency the flagship monitored. "This is Dr. Nora Vance," she said. She paused. She had not used her own name in 241 days. "I am the alien woman you threw away," she said. "You may want to write that down. There will be others after me, and they will want to know my name." She cut the channel. She brought the Petroses home. She did not destroy the Karen. She had thought about it. She had planned for it. But she found when the moment came that she did not want to kill the 800 crew, most of whom had never spoken to her, most of whom were soldiers the way Petros the engineer had been a soldier, conscripts in someone else's war. She crippled the engines. She let the flagship drift. She let the bridge see, through the broken hull plate, the long, slow shapes of her sharks circling outside in the dark, watching them, waiting. She let the Vrethic feel what it was to be the prey. For 16 hours she let them feel it. 16 hours, while the hegemonic relays lit up across the rim with the news, while the Hunt fleet that had been assembling for the assault on her sector hesitated and slowed and finally, at the order of a panicking junior admiral whose name Nora would never know, turned back. Then she opened the channel one more time. She gave the Karen a heading. She told them to limp back to the hegemonic core. She told them to tell the people there what she had told the Overseer. She told them that the Hunt fleet was not coming to Earth. Not now, not ever. She told them that if any Vrethic ship ever again touched a human vessel, the next station she built would not be one station. It would be 12. And the next pack she raised would not be 21. It would be 200. She told them that she had only used Earth's apex predator because Earth's apex predator was what they had stolen from her. She told them that Earth had others. She told them, very quietly, that Earth had things in its deep oceans that she had not yet had the courage to wake up, and that she hoped, for the sake of the hegemony, that no Vrethic ever made her courageous enough. She cut the channel. She turned the station around. She brought the Petroses home, the long way, the slow way, through the dark between stars, because the station's old engines could not make jump and she did not want them to. She wanted the trip. She wanted the time. She wanted to be alone with what she had done and to find out, in the quiet, whether she could still live with herself afterward. She found that she could, mostly. The nights were hard. The nights in the green-lit command pit with the dead project lead's empty chair behind her and the slow circling shadows of her sharks in the bay below were very hard. But the days when she walked the catwalks and let them see her face, when she fed them and named them and watched them coordinate in the silent dark, the days were all right. She hummed Petros' old song while she worked, the original Petros song, the one his grandmother had taught him. She did not remember the words. She remembered the tune. It took her 3 months, by her own reckoning, to reach the edge of human space. A Confederation picket caught her on its long-range scans first. A small, fast cutter named the Magellan, captained by a woman named Adesina Akafer, who had been told nothing about a missing science vessel called the Lazarus, because the Lazarus had been written off as lost to a comet strike 8 months ago, and its file had been closed. Captain Akafer's first transmission was cautious. "Unknown vessel, this is the Magellan. Identify yourself." Nora was sitting in the command pit. Her broken wrist had healed wrong. Her hair, which she had cut herself with a ceramic blade, was uneven. She was wearing a stolen Vrethic pressure suit with the helmet off, and she was, by her own honest reckoning, the strangest-looking thing the Magellan had ever scanned. She opened the channel. "Magellan," she said. "This is Dr. Nora Vance of the Lazarus." There was a long pause. "The Lazarus was lost," Captain Akafer said. Her voice was very careful. 8 months ago." "I know," Nora said. "I was there." Another pause, longer. "Dr. Vance," Captain Akafer said, "what is the configuration of the vessel you are aboard? Our scans are reading some unusual signatures." Nora looked out through the observation port. The Petroses were drifting in the bay in their slow, patient circles. The largest of them, the one that had bitten through the Kaarin's cooling baffle, was watching her through the diamond mesh with its black, wet eye. "Captain," Nora said, "I am going to need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you." She told her. It took 3 hours. Captain Akefer did not interrupt. When Nora was finished, Captain Akefer was silent for a long time. Then Captain Akefer said, in a voice that was no longer cautious at all, "Welcome home, Doctor." The Confederation Navy did not know what to do with her. This was reasonable. The Confederation Navy had been planning, for the past 3 years, for a war with the Vrethic hegemony that everyone in the Admiralty had known they would lose. Now, suddenly, the war was cancelled, and the hegemony was in political convulsions, and the agent of those convulsions was a 34-year-old marine biologist with a fractured wrist and a derelict alien station, and 20 animals that the Navy's Xenobiology Division did not, at first, believe were possible. They debriefed her for 9 days. They examined the Petroses through the station's observation ports because she would not allow anyone aboard, and she would not allow the Petroses to be moved, and she would not, under any circumstances, allow the Petroses to be euthanized for research, which was the first thing the Xenobiology Division proposed, and the last thing they proposed before she made it very clear that this was not a topic for further discussion. They wanted to give her a medal. She told them what they could do with the medal. They wanted to put her in front of a press conference. She told them what they could do with the press conference. They wanted, eventually, to ask her what she did want. She told them. She wanted to see her father. He was waiting on the dock. It was a small dock, in a small town, on a small island off the coast of what had once been called Greece, and was now called something else by some people and the same thing by others. The town had a fishing fleet and a church and a single cafe, and a lighthouse that her father had kept for 30 years before he had retired, and her father was standing on the dock with his hands in the pockets of an old wool coat that her mother had bought him before she died, and his hair was whiter than she remembered, and his face was the same face he had had since she was 4 years old. The Confederation had brought her down in a small, unmarked shuttle. They had agreed not to send a press pool. They had agreed to keep the town's airspace clear. They had agreed, after she had asked very politely and then very firmly, to land her at the dock and then leave. The shuttle's ramp came down. She walked down it. Her wrist was in a soft brace. Her hair was still uneven. She was wearing a borrowed jacket that did not fit her right. Her father did not move. He waited. He had always waited. It was one of the things she had loved about him most when she was small, that her father, alone among all the adults in her life, had never seemed to be in a hurry for her to be anywhere other than exactly where she was. She walked the length of the dock toward him. The boards were old. They creaked under her boots. The sea smelled the way it had always smelled, salt and old rope and the faint sweet rot of seaweed drying on the rocks. A gull went over. She stopped in front of him. "Hi, Dad." He looked at her for a long time. His eyes moved over her face the way a man looks at a thing he has missed. He did not say anything yet. He was, she remembered, a man who took his time with sentences. He had always been. Then he said, "Your mother would have known what to say." "I know," she said. "I don't," he said. "That's all right," she said. He opened his arms. She walked into them. He was thinner than she remembered, and shorter, the way fathers get shorter, and he smelled of pipe tobacco and the same aftershave he had worn since 1994, and she put her face against his shoulder, and she cried for the first time since she had wept inside her helmet on the salvage tug. He held her. He did not pat her back. He did not say it was all right. He held her the way he had held her when she was 9 and her dog had died, which was the way she had needed to be held then, and the way she needed to be held now. And after a long time he said, very quietly, into her uneven hair. "They told me you were dead, sweetheart." "I know. They had a funeral. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," he said. "Don't ever be sorry for being alive." She laughed. It came out wet and broken. He laughed too, very softly, the way he laughed at his own jokes, which had always been the worst jokes anyone in her family had told. After a while he stepped back. He held her at arm's length. He looked at her face again. He said, "Are you hungry?" "Yes. I have soup." "Of course you have soup. Come inside." She came inside. The house was the same. The kitchen was the same. The soup was the same, white beans and lamb and rosemary from the garden, the recipe her grandmother had brought from the village, the recipe her father had cooked every Sunday of her childhood. He ladled it into a bowl and set it in front of her, and he sat across from her at the small wooden table where she had eaten 10,000 meals. She ate, he watched her eat. After a while he said, "There's a shark in the bay." She stopped. "I went down this morning," he said, "to look. There's a shark in the bay. It's gray. It has a kind of ridge along the back. It came up to the dock and it looked at me." He paused. He was not, she remembered, a man who panicked. He was a man who reported what he had seen and waited for an explanation. "Is it yours?" he said. "Yes," she said. "All right," he said. He took another spoonful of his soup. "Does it have a name?" "Petros," she said. He nodded slowly. He had known Petros the engineer slightly once at a conference years ago. He remembered the name. "All right," he said again. He did not ask her that night what she had done. He did not ask her where she had been. He let her finish her soup, and he made her tea, and he put a blanket over her on the old couch in the living room, and he sat in the chair across from her with his own tea and his own pipe, and he watched her sleep, the way he had watched her sleep when she was 4, when she had been afraid of the dark, when he had told her. She remembered it now, lying half asleep, the firelight on the ceiling, that there was nothing in the dark that could not be looked at, and that the trick to not being afraid was to be the kind of person who looked. She slept, she did not dream. In the morning she woke before her father did, the way she had woken before him every morning of her childhood, and she made coffee on the old stovetop pot the way her mother had taught her, and she carried 2 cups out to the front step, and she sat in the cold sea air, and she watched the dawn come up over the bay. The lighthouse was dark. It had been dark for the 11 years since her father had retired. The new keeper lived on the mainland and only came out to check the equipment once a month, and the light itself had been automated, and the old keeper's stairwell was now full of the boxes of her mother's books that no one had been able to bring themselves to throw away. She climbed the stairwell in her father's coat, with her coffee in her hand. She came out at the top into the cold wind, and she stood at the rail where she had stood 10,000 mornings as a child, and she looked down at the water. The Petroses were there, all of them. She had not asked them to come. They had followed her, the long, slow way from the Confederation drop point, the way they had followed her out of the Vexor station and across 3 months of empty space and through the cordoned military approach corridor, and down, finally, into the bay where she had learned to swim. They drifted in a loose, patient circle, slate ridges breaking the surface, and when she leaned out over the rail, the largest of them rolled to show her its pale belly, the way it had rolled in the tank on the day she had first taught it her face. She raised her coffee to it. She drank. She thought, watching them, that she would have to find a way to feed them. She thought she would have to talk to the local fishermen, who were her father's friends and who would have questions, and who would deserve answers. She thought she would have to talk to the Greek government, and the Confederation, and probably eventually the press, and there would be 100 small, ugly negotiations ahead of her over the next year, and she would have to be patient with all of them, the way her father had taught her to be patient. She thought she could do that. She thought she had learned patience on the Kaarin. She thought she had learned it from the Vrethik themselves, who had been so patient with her for 241 days, and who had taught her by their example what patience could build. She finished her coffee. She went back down the stairs. In the morning she went down to the dock with her father, and she sat with her bare feet hanging over the side, and the shark came up. It was the big one, the one that had bitten through the Kairin's cooling baffle. It surfaced with the slow patience of a thing that had all the time in the world, and it brought its long gray snout to within an inch of her toes, and it watched her with its black, wet eye. She put her hand in the water. She let her fingers brush its skin. It was cold and rough, the way she remembered. "Hey, Petros," she said. Her father sat down beside her on the dock. He looked at the shark for a long time. Then he said, "What do they want?" "They want to be near me. That's all. That's all." He nodded. "Will they leave?" "When I tell them to." "And if you don't tell them to?" "They'll stay." He thought about this. He took his pipe out of his pocket. He did not light it. He just held it. "There are people," he said, "who are going to come looking for you." "I know. Confederation people." "I know. And other kinds." "I know that too." He was quiet for a while. The shark drifted under the dock. Another one came up behind it, a smaller one, 4 feet long, the youngest. It had been born in the station 2 months before she had left. It had never seen Earth. "I'm not afraid for you, sweetheart," her father said. He said it carefully, the way he said things he had thought about. "I want you to know that. I was afraid for you for 8 months. I'm not afraid for you anymore." "Thank you, Dad." "I'm a little afraid," he said, "for them." He nodded at the sharks. "The people who come looking," he said, "Confederation or other, I'm a little afraid for them." She watched the water. She watched the small one circle the big one. She watched the long, slow, gray shapes in the bay where she had learned to swim when she was 5. "You don't have to be afraid for them either, Dad." "No. No," she said. "They knew what they were doing when they threw me away." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "That's my girl." He lit his pipe. They sat on the dock together, the old lighthouse keeper and the woman who had come back from the dark, and the sharks moved in slow, patient circles in the bay below. And the sun came up over the water the way it had always come up, and somewhere very far away, in the cold halls of the hegemonic core, an overseer with a gray pallor along his thorax was being asked, by his superiors, to explain how he had let a single warm-blooded specimen outthink the entire Vrethic biology core. He did not have a good answer. There would never be a good answer. The galaxy had learned a new word that month. They had been speaking it for some time in various forms, but they had not understood until Dr. Nora Vance what the word actually meant. They had thought it meant something small and soft and brief. They had filed it under unimportant things. The word was human. They were filing it differently now. In the high cold rooms of the hegemonic core, in the council chambers of the Krell Confederation, in the dark hives of the Seleth and the slow stone parliaments of the Vor, in every place in the galaxy where ancient civilized species had ever made a list of things to be careful of, the word human was being moved. Quietly, without comment, from the bottom of the list, where it had always been, to somewhere much, much higher. It was being moved with a small note appended. The note said, in the trade language of the Rim, "They do not need water to kill." And below that, in smaller text in the same hand, "Do not throw them away." On the small island off the coast of what had once been called Greece, the lighthouse keeper's daughter sat on the dock with her father, and ate the soup he made her, and walked the cliffs in the evenings with the smallest of her Petroses following her offshore, its gray ridge breaking the surface of the water like a slow, patient wave. She did not give interviews. She did not write a book. She did not, despite the Confederation Navy's increasingly polite requests, return to active service. She did, eventually, build the second station. But that was a long time later, and it was for a different reason, and it is a different story. For now she was home. For now she sat on her father's dock, with her feet in the cold water, and the sharks she had made in the dark moved in slow circles below her, and the sun came up. The galaxy could wait. It had waited for her once before. It could wait again.